Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. So good to see you all. May I please request that if you can hear me, if you can just type in the chat that yes, you can hear me. Can I request if you can hear me to please just type in the chat, yes? Okay, fine. Thanks, Avantika. All right, good to see you back. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. For those of you joining for the first time, my name is Dale, and this is a new series of webinars that we are starting. In fact, we're going to be doing a couple of them, some which will be very focused around the industries that we engage with, some which will be spotlight series where we take little individual things associated with our industry of language and drama and highlight some of them that are coming up. And then, of course, we're going to continue to reach out with an open mic or an open house, wherein you can call in and ask whatever queries you'd like. And of course, we're also going to be doing some which are purely teaching related webinars. And so hence, today, teachers, I'm going to ask you, like we always do, to please just give us some material, give us some thoughts that you want us to work on, and we'd be very happy to kind of build it out from there. As always, my entire team and my colleagues on the academic team will be presenting these series of webinars. And now that it's 2 minutes after, or 3 minutes after, I'd like to introduce and welcome my colleague who's going to be hosting this session today, Shoma. So all of you know Shoma Poddar, all right? Shoma has this amazing ability that she can always look fresh, and she looks like this even at 2 in the morning. During this wonderful season, when we come in towards the end of the year, there's a bit of a nip in the air. It's always good to have bright and smiley face ready to take you through all that we're ready to learn today. So for those of you who are meeting Shoma for the first time, she's an integral part of the academic support team and has been with Trinity since 2012. Shoma is a trained ESL professional with experience in teaching both adults and children in India and abroad. She's very passionate about language, not just English. She also works with Japanese, and of course is also passionate about her native Bengali. But among all the other qualities that Shoma will possess, the one that stands out the most to me is the one that she's ever willing to help teachers. So I'm very glad that we could kick off this afternoon's series, which will follow through over the next couple of months, with Shoma leading you in a discussion on English at work. I'm also joined today by Soumyan, who is our head of operations, and Soumyan and myself are going to kind of recede into the background as Shoma takes over, and of course we're there for questions. So thank you once again for joining us this afternoon, and welcome. Shoma, all yours.
Thank you so much, Dale and Soumyan. A very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special webinar on English at work. We are so glad that you could join us today. In today's webinar, I am going to talk about English language skills gap at workplaces, what kind of skills employers expect you to have, the kind of job functions in healthcare, travel and tourism, retail, hospitality, and ITeS. I'm also going to take you through a few very basic techniques in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And in the last segment, would also like to share with you how these 4 skills can be developed progressively through our Trinity English language syllabi. But before I can talk about anything really, there is one question I'd like to ask, which I'm certain that we all know the answer to. Why English at work? What I mean to ask is, why does English play such a dominant role in, at least in our work lives? So if you could just maybe type on the chat box in a short one sentence or a phrase, please, that would really be good. Why English at work? Why do you think English plays such a dominant role at work? On the chat box, please. That's right, Beena. Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Beena, Avantika. Yes, so it's not a trick question. It's I just wanted to check with you if you're all on the same page here. Well, yes, it is an internationally recognized language. It helps to connect with the world. That's absolutely right. In fact, English is the common language of business communication. So it is the common, just a second. It is, I'm sorry, can you see the screen? Yeah, all right.
So yes, I can.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. So it is the lingua franca. It is the common language of global business. And just to get the scale here, to understand the scale here, it's spoken by at least 2 billion people worldwide, with at least 1 billion fluent speakers in countries like India. So, which goes on to show the scale at, how English is so, plays such a dominant role. Now, one thing, of course, is it's pretty obvious that just having English language skills alone will not make somebody employable. But it's important to understand that someone is more likely to be employable if they have language skills, because it helps in the development of other essential 21st century skills like empathy, collaboration, etc. Unfortunately, there is a problem, there is a skills gap, an English language skills gap at workplaces, which is becoming a bit of a drag, honestly speaking, because the kind of language skills that are required and the English language skills that employees have in almost every industry, there is quite a yawning gap. And across all company sizes, this gap is almost a 40% skills gap. So this is quite a serious problem. Actually, according to Naukri.com, the research shows that students leave schools and colleges without the kind of proficiency in English that they need in order to take advantage of, say, employment opportunities. So the operative word here is the necessary proficiency. So I'm so sorry. Yeah. Now, if we cut into the current landscape, the kind of landscape in the post-pandemic world that we are in, it's not just the ability to speak or verbal communication. What is equally important is that employers want workers to be able to connect with clients on video conferencing platforms like Zoom, Google Meet, to be able to write emails, compose, to be able to use reports, write reports, talk to clients. So it's not just one kind of skill, but you have to be multifaceted. Now, it would be easier to understand if we get what employers really need. Employers need from you certain level of English proficiency, and it's quite common these days for employers to ask for specific levels of English proficiency. So they could maybe ask for, say, depending on the industry, depending on your job profile, maybe a beginner level or A1 or a C2 level, an advanced level. For those of you who are not familiar with this, I'm talking about CEFR, or Common European Framework of Reference. So For those of you who don't know much about CEFR, it is simply put a framework of reference to describe language ability, and it is available in 6 different levels. So beginner level being A1 and the advanced level being C2. So the best way to go about with it is maybe take an English language exam that shows the level that you're at. So it will be a lot easier for your employers or say colleges or universities to figure out what you can do with the language. And mind you, it can be any language. So research shows that evaluating all 4 communication skills gives a more precise and accurate idea of a candidate's English language ability, which brings me to the next part of the segment. So while we are on the subject of standardized tests, it would make sense to see reading, writing, listening, speaking in the way they come together across industries. And the first industry that I would like to, the first sector that I would like to, talk about is English for healthcare. So when we refer to healthcare, we're obviously not talking only about doctors or nurses. We're referring to allied health professionals who are directly or indirectly responsible for providing support to individuals as well as their families. So medical knowledge, of course, is very important. There's no denying that. Medical knowledge, your training, that's extremely important. But the other thing that is extremely crucial is how you communicate with your superiors, your co-workers, and most importantly, how you communicate with your patients. Now, there are, in order to do well in the healthcare industry, it's important that, you need all 4 skills, especially reading and writing. This reading and writing is all the more important in this sector is because, if you have to write maybe even an email or a report, or say you're writing an article in a medical journal, you will need to have certain basic skills at least to be able to communicate, in writing. So before I go into I would like to share a few tips with you here about writing, but before I go into that, it would be good if we can have a quick look at the job functions in healthcare. So at the very basic, you should be able to welcome or greet your patients either on phone or in person, or even, writing emails and being able to book in or confirm details, responding through emails, phone calls, telephone inquiries. You may have to take messages through memos and emails or direct phone calls with your colleagues, with your superiors. It's also important that sometimes you may have to give instructions and suggestions according to your patients, the health problems that they have, giving recommendations, also being able to clarify your doubts, or maybe your position with regard to something, or asking for clarifications. There are a few more job functions, for example, to be able to give suggestions and advice, or maybe breaking down medical jargons into easy to understand language. And last but not the least, I think it's very important that you are also able to synthesize information based on the kind of data or the graph or the chart that in order to be able to break it down maybe for stakeholders and colleagues through reports, emails, etc. Now, of course, this is not an all-inclusive list, but what I'm trying to get at is that you need to be comfortable with all skills. That brings me to the next segment about writing skills. So in the current scenario, it's impossible to just get by with good verbal communication skills. So you have to be able to be comfortable with, say, writing all these, maybe develop proposals or articles or writing reports. Now, whether you're writing a short story or any of these, reports or emails, it's important that you see writing as a process. So when I talk about writing as a process, what I mean to say is that you don't just focus on one finished, just the final product that you're writing. There are some component parts of the writing process. So you need to think about who it is that you're writing for, what it is that you're writing, and the purpose of your writing, what kind of evidence you have in order to support your claims, how you're organizing the structure, how you're sequencing your ideas, and last but not the least, the finer, the grammar, punctuation, spelling, etc. So especially if it's a professional writer, and if you observe how professional writers write, they take some time to even think about what they're writing. So, the initial bit may take even 5 months for a professional writer to pen their thoughts down. Of course, we won't have that kind of time in the kind of jobs that we do, but even spending 5 minutes to think about what you want to write before you actually start putting your thoughts on your paper would make a lot of sense. So the first component of the writing process is your reader, your audience. Yes. This is something that helps me, but it doesn't have to work for everyone. I like to believe, I like to at least picture my audience. So what could they be doing at that time? Maybe they're in a big hurry, they're distracted, like the lady here who has a book with her, but she's also distracted with the cat that's sitting near her chair. So if I burden my reader with unnecessary information, chances are that they're going to walk away from what I've written, and you don't want that. So the best way is to think about what your reader wants before you even start writing. And then the other question that you need to ask yourself is, who is your reader? Is it your boss? Is it your supervisor? Is it a friend or a colleague that you're writing to? Or is it the patient or your customer? So once you've figured that out, or at least you have some idea about who your audience is, everything else will fall into place, or everything will lead you to the next stage. So you will immediately know what kind of style, what kind of format you have to use. Yes, you have to be a little more mindful of who your reader is. So the things that you need to remember is that if you're writing to your superiors or your colleagues, then the style and the tone will also vary accordingly. So is it something that you're writing for the layman? So according to that, you will have to think about how you're going to write and your grammar, your language, etc., so that it resonates with your reader. So the style and tone, of course, is something that we hear very often. So what is style and tone? Style is the manner in the way in which you write something. So the words, your sentence structure, your grammar, that creates your style. Now, you may have a very different style from mine. You may be fond of writing, say, short or crisp sentences. I may go for maybe slightly longer sentences. And that's absolutely fine to have different styles. But at least you should know how you're going to go about with it. Tone is, on the other hand, is the attitude that you have towards your subject or your reader, right? So it can be, of course, academic, it can be formal, depending on your audience, depending on who's reading it. So like I've mentioned, if it is your boss or your superior, chances are that you're not going to use a frivolous tone, right? There has to be a certain degree of formality in the way you write. Similarly, if it is your friend or your colleague, you can't be too overly stuffy in the way you write. You have to relax your tone a bit. That brings me to the next part, which are a few tips on style and tone. So the first step in the writing process is you think about your reader, you think about your style and tone, even before you start writing. The third thing is that you need to be aware of what kind of genre you're writing in. So a genre could be, an email, it could be a report, it could be an article, and all these genres have their own specific conventions. And you cannot take liberties with that, right? Because that would just make your writing look sloppy or very unprofessional. So a certain measure of awareness of the writing genre is extremely important. We may have forgotten if we haven't written in a long time. So what goes on in a formal email, what goes in a formal letter, or if I'm writing a report, what are the things that I need to be aware of? So these things I am going to ask Dale. In fact, he has already shared with you on the chat box an easy, very an easy reckoner, a ready reckoner, so that it's called Guide to Genres, Writing Genres from our Trinity English Language website. So the next time you write something, you can just refer to that so that you know that you're on the right track. So once that tone and the genre is in place, the next thing that you do is you think about the person that you're writing for, as in if it's a customer or a patient, your tone needs to be a little approachable. So maybe if you can use a first person or a second person voice, that would make, as if you're having a direct conversation with your reader. And this is just an advice, but it's better if you don't use too many complex words and jargons, especially in your writing. It's all right if you're writing to maybe somebody who understands that. But if it is a layperson, it's better that you stay away from it. But we are all guilty of this. Even if we do use technical knowledge, you could maybe use an M dash or maybe within brackets, give a definition of what the jargon is. The next step is where you think about your organization and your structure. And this can, I can assure you that it doesn't take very long. So even if you're if you're really rushed for time, just spending 3 or 4 minutes thinking about these component parts will actually give a proper direction to your writing. So when you're organizing your structure, it's important to put the most important things first, right? So you front load the information. It's better if it is there in the introduction itself, so you know that the reader is going to go for it as they read along. And that's another reason why you're hooking the reader onto what you want them to read. So if you keep the important things for later in the, say, the 3rd paragraph, chances are the distracted reader will not want to read it, right? So you don't want to take a risk with that. The second thing is, you don't want your writing to be one monolithic whole, right? So it's just one slab of writing. You want to chunk it into paragraphs. That's extremely important. That's easier said than done, because paragraphing can be a little bit of a trick, especially if you're in a hurry where you want to cram maybe 2 or 3 ideas into one paragraph. Please try and not do that. Each paragraph will have only one main idea. So you chunk it into, say, an introduction, 2 or 3 paragraphs in between, and then you conclude. Now, many of us think that, if we have 50 different ideas, we're going to cram all of it into 50 paragraphs. I'm exaggerating, of course, but it's something that, if you're in an academic, if you're writing in this kind of format, it's advisable not to go for it, unless, of course, it is, you're writing, a novel or a short story, then you can play along with this. But if it's academic writing, it's advisable not to go for a longer than a 5 or 6 paragraph writing. So the other thing that you need to remember is that if you want it to be, a report or, say, a letter, and you want to really get the reader's attention, use headings or subheadings, bullet points, etc., to catch their attention. And last but not the least, do not ignore the last step here. You have to try and at least do a little bit of proofreading before you send out something. So check for errors, check for grammatical errors or spelling errors, because nobody wants to read any sloppy kind of writing. The next skill that I want to talk about is reading skills, which go in hand with writing, and especially very important in healthcare, but it goes across, it's important across all industries, in fact. So especially in healthcare, you may have to go through patient information, reports, graph, etc. And you have to maybe asked to write or summarize in your own words based on what you've read. So it's important that you not just retain or comprehend complex information, but also be able to use in your own words, write in your own words what you have, to be able to synthesize information from what you've read. Reading is really not as complex as it's made to be if you follow a few things, follow a few steps here. The first is, of course, you need to engage with the text. You need to be able to have some kind of connect with the text instead of just going passively onto reading the way you want it, because you'll end up missing lots of important information. The second thing is, the one way to go about with active reading, like you call it, is ask yourself the 5 questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And then you start reading and you keep asking yourselves the answers to these questions. So that will give a direction to your reading and will make you more focused so that you don't get distracted. Because especially in academic settings, you may not always get very interesting things to read. So it's only normal that your attention goes here and there. So this is one great way to keep it on track. I would strongly advise that you break down the introduction to understand what the purpose of your reading is. Like I mentioned this when we were talking about writing, that the introduction is the crux of your reading, because it's the crux of your writing. So this is where you want to include what the main idea or the thesis of your writing is going to be. So similarly in reading, when you're reading anything for that matter, don't skip the introduction. This is where the writer is going to include the main thesis. There are many ways to, many different sub-skills to reading. These are not shortcuts, mind you, but these are techniques that will help us to break down reading into, make it simpler, make it easier to understand. And also if you have a large amounts of text, for example, how to read it in a manner that's not just quickly, but also to understand it. For example, if you're talking about, say, skimming a text, as you can see on the screen here, a picture of a stone skimming the surface, or skimming butter. The stone is not really going into the depths of the water. It's barely touching the surface. So if your boss or your superior is giving you, say, a report to read and is given you exactly 15 minutes and asked you to come back with a summary, for example, you're not going to read it word for word. Skimming is a very important speed reading technique as well, along with scanning, which helps you to cover large amounts of text in a very short time. So just one thing that you need to remember is it's not the ability of reading something quickly. You have to be able to understand what you're reading. So in this first speed reading technique, when you're skimming, just make sure that you read the introductory paragraph very carefully. You pay very close attention to the first and the last sentences of each paragraph, because that's where the main idea of each paragraph will be. So you don't want to miss out on that. You need to know what each paragraph is referring to. And it's important to also pay very careful attention to, say, fonts or subheadings, because they are they take different directions. They're like roadmaps. So you want to be sure that you want to make sure that you haven't missed out on anything. For example, the slide that you see here has got different kinds of fonts, right? So it's italicized, maybe in bold. So this is where the writer wants to grab your attention. So you don't want to miss that. You also want to be very careful about, say, the nouns or adjectives in a writing. So when you're reading something, make sure that you haven't missed out these minor details. And last but not the least, make sure that you've also read the conclusion, because that's a recap of what you have read. So nothing new is really included in the conclusion, but it is a great way to make sure that you've understood the text. So that is skim reading in a nutshell. So you're just trying to get a surface idea of what you've read and not reading it word for word. The other speed reading technique is scanning. So where your eyes are on, you're on search mode. You're searching for specific information in a very short time. So just to give you an example, if you're at a restaurant and you've been given the menu card and you want to maybe pick up something specific, you're not going to read word for word. That's where your brain is already deploying scanning techniques. So, but when you're doing it, when you're reading something with maybe with the sole intention of getting a specific information, make sure that you deploy these steps here. So you want to be very clear what it is that you're looking for. So you keep it in your mind's eye. So, and then you go back to the text, to the reading matter, your eyes split up and down, back and forth. And once you've found it, don't be in a hurry, read around it, right? So that's something that will really help you to scan for information very, very quickly. But if the text or the reading matter is huge, it's quite long, and you won't be able to scan it, in one single search. Maybe you do a preliminary skimming first, and then you go for specific details. That brings me to the next segment, which is English in retail, ITeS, hospitality, travel and tourism. These industries rely very heavily on English, because this is where the customers are directly interfacing with you, and they're turning to you for help. So it could be a minor emergency, it could be a minor inconvenience or something huge, but the customers are entirely depending on you for support. So whoever is from this industry will need to be, and I know it's easier said than done, but you need to be calm, and you have to be able to negotiate and persuade the customer, and most importantly, be able to listen to what the customer is saying. So the customer is going to derive confidence from you. So the way you communicate in English is going to make a huge difference in the customer's life. So which brings me to the next two skills, which is listening and speaking, two very important skills. So I'm going to start with listening first, active listening, and then move on to verbal communication. But before I do that, it would be great if we can have a look at the job functions in these sectors. So when we talk about hospitality, travel and tourism, the most common job functions in these, again, would be be able to greet customers, confirming details, dealing with inquiries on phones, emails, and again, social media. If you're in the hospitality or tourism industry, you should be able to at least give in very specific information about the facilities in the hotels, helping customers with their travel arrangements, clarifying doubts, dealing with customer complaints, quelling anxieties, answering questions, giving suggestions whenever needed. And if you notice these slides, you'd notice that there are quite a few functions that are common. In fact, there are many that are common. And that's the whole point, that you can't really say that my job is to just pick up the phone and answer queries. You should be able to you need to be comfortable with all four skills at least, right? Now, when we talk about active listening, with the kind of listening that we all do, we think that, we're all great at it. Unfortunately, not. Studies have shown that we only remember between 25 to 50% of what we hear. So the next time you're talking to someone, maybe your friends or your colleagues or your spouse, chances are that they may be retaining 50% of, or just 25% of what they've heard. So how can we become better listeners? How can we deploy active listening in the way we communicate? So, but before I go into that, we need to know what active listening is. This is when you make a very, at least a conscious effort from your part to understand what the other person is saying. So you get a complete understanding. And you listen in with all of your senses, much like, if you're a therapist listening to your client, you're the sounding board, you're not making any judgment. So how do we go about with this? The first thing, of course, is that you need to pay very careful attention to what you're listening to. So if somebody's talking to you and you're already thinking of a response ahead of what they've said, you're thinking 2 steps ahead, chances are that you're going to miss out on important information. And most importantly, you're not giving the kind of respect that you should be giving to whoever it is on the other side. The other way you could do it, of course, is you signal understanding. So through verbal or non-verbal feedback. It's obviously not possible when you're on the phone and you can't see the other person. But it's one good way to go about with it is maybe summarize or paraphrase what you've heard. So that makes the other person, even on the other side of the line, they'll know that you're listening to what they've said. And if it is face-to-face communication, even if it is, say, on Zoom or your in-person communication, you can smile, you can nod. Sometimes you can make eye contact, so the person knows that they've got your ears. it's important once you've got the preliminary understanding of what is bothering or what the other person is saying, you can then go on to ask for clarifications, ask further questions. So there is a time for all of this to happen. You can't jump, and you shouldn't at any point be stopping the person from finishing what they've said, and you bring in your own judgment. So the things that you shouldn't be doing when you are when you're listening actively is interrupting the speaker or rushing the speaker. If you're already distracted, it will show, right? So you don't want that to happen. And it's also important that you don't focus on every minute detail, because chances are you'll miss out on the big picture. The next bit is where we talk about verbal communication, because in verbal communication or speaking skills, this is something that skill is so very important in any industry that we are in. We know that at this point of time, we can't predict how things are going to pan out, but this is the best time to be able to upskill ourselves with all these various, all 4 skills that if we think that these are the skills that we're not very confident about, now is the time to be able to do that. So even before you speak, it would be good if you can think about the points that you want to share with the person on the other end of the line. So if you could maybe use something like a simple mind map with the 5 or 6 questions, W questions, where, who, how, when, that would really help you in planning out what you want to say, and that will make things comfortable even for you. So this is something that we use in our GESI exams from Trinity. So we always encourage our learners to use mind maps for anything that they want to speak about, because a mind map is not just something that looks a blank piece of paper, you put some boxes there. It is a great way to be able to map what you want to speak about. A few tips that I could share with you, which I think really helps, is that it's important that you think from the perspective of your audience. So will this person understand what you've said? Then by all means, go ahead and use jargons, use the language that you think that the person will understand. Else, just use a simple pitch. That will always help. That's always something that helps to understand. Be an active listener. So we've already spoken about that. I've discussed in the earlier segment. So if you're a good listener, it will automatically help you to become a better speaker, at least. And your audience, the person who's on the other end of the line, will immediately have a better rapport with you. And vary your vocal tone. Use different inflections to emphasize whatever important points that you have in order to carry across your pitch. That brings me to the end of the segment, and I would move on to talk about our English language syllabi, Trinity English language syllabi. So some of you may be familiar with English, with Trinity. Trinity College London is an exam board. We offer qualifications in drama, performing arts, English language, communication skills. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is graded exams in spoken English, which is a showstopper. In fact, it is extremely popular, along with integrated skills in English, or ISC. The GESI, in fact, it tests 2 very important skills, listening and speaking, and it is available in 12 different levels. So you have, as you can see here, there are 12 grades. So you start off with, it's mapped to the CEFR. So you start off from the beginner level at pre-A1, in fact, which is A0, goes all the way up to C2. It is, the beauty of these exams in Trinity is that it's not one size fits all. So you have a level for each learner. So you decide which level you're most comfortable with, and then you prepare for the test and take the exam. So just to give you an example of how this progression happens, I wouldn't want to go into the details of the tasks in GESI, but just to give you some examples, some idea if you don't know about it, there are tasks according to each level at each grade. At the lowest level, say at grade 1, The conversation is mostly examiner-led, and it is the examiner will be asking very simple questions that the candidate has to respond to. It could be in maybe the candidate can answer in just one word or one sentence, and that's fine. There's more listening here and more being able to follow what the examiner is saying through verbal or non-verbal medium. By the time a candidate is in grade 3, there is a lot of emphasis on language functions. So the candidate has to show some awareness of the usage of language functions in the way they communicate with the examiner. So if it is a 7-minute conversation with the examiner, the candidate will be asked questions, and they should be able to use these language functions in the way they say. For example, at grade 3, they should be able to give directions, so speak about ability and inabilities. By the time the candidate is at grade 4, they have to be able to present a topic to the examiner, right? And the topic is not something that you learn by heart and you memorize and you discuss with the examiner. It's completely unscripted, and it's entirely very heavily personalized. It has reference to the candidate's life. So the examiner will be engaging the candidate in a dialogic conversation that lasts for about 5 minutes. So the candidate or the test taker is at the heart of the exam, and they're using the language functions of the level that they're appearing for. So from the time they are at the initial stage, which is where the examiner is leading the conversations, from the time they're, say, in grade 4 or 5, they should be able to be comfortable asking the examiner questions as well. And from grade 7, it is the candidate who is taking more control of the exam. And by the time they do a grade 12 exam, which is advanced level or mastery, the candidate is able to talk about any kind of abstract topics, right? So you're moving from the concrete to the abstract. And at grade 12, for example, the candidate has to be able to present a formal topic with the examiner, and that can last for about 10 minutes with the presentation as well as the discussion. So if you see the progression, it starts from baby steps and then moves all the way up to, more being able to be comfortable using different kind of language functions in the tasks that they have at that level. And that is how, Trinity has very beautifully crafted the syllabus. So what you see on the right-hand side is the syllabus book for the GESE exams, which Dale will share with you maybe on an email or through the chat. Coming to the next qualification that we have, which is the integrated skills in English. It is a very contemporary all 4 skills exam from Trinity, which is available in 5 different levels. So you've got at the most basic, you've got ISC Foundation at CEFR A2 all the way to ISC 4, which is at CEFR C2, advanced or mastery level. So this particular qualification is available in 2 different modules, the reading and writing module and the listening and speaking module. So the way these modules operate is that the skills come together very beautifully, right? So reading and writing are tested not just discretely or independently, but together as well. Similarly, listening and speaking are also tested together and discretely, just like how skills come together in real life. So this, I think, is in a nutshell the kind of exams, the kind of qualifications that we have from the English language. But I would also like to take you through the guidance and resources available. So our website, the Trinity website, is in fact a treasure trove, and you have plenty of materials that you can use to not just use for your own preparation, but if you're a teacher and you want to train your students on these skills, on these qualifications, all you need to do is go to the website, click on the link, download it, and use it to your advantage. It's like a one-stop shop, right? So you've got all possible kind of resources that you would need in order to appear for any of these exams or train any of your students for these exams. So if you've got any questions for us, we'd really be happy to answer that.
Thank you, Shoma. So it appears that, well, we've got no questions, but there's been a lot happening in the chat. I think some teachers have realized for the first time, perhaps, that we have something related to language qualifications and so on. And if you actually go in through what I've shared in the chat box are detailed links to each of the syllabi that you can download. And hence, variation of how long each exam is would vary as per the grade. So please have a look at that in the syllabus. As far as costs, you can get in touch with your local Trinity office and they'll give you a spreadsheet of the cost of the assessments, which would cover kind of all the pricings that you need. So please just reach out to your local office or send me a mail after this and I'll happily send that to you. All right, Shobha, you can stop sharing over here. Thank you. I'm going to hold on and see if we're getting any more questions that are coming up. So just want to let you know that this is the first of what will be a few more webinars, and that hopefully we can run these webinars right until the month of March. Some of them are going to be developed, focused around different verticals of industry and different kinds of industries that could benefit from some of the areas we're in. And we're hence dividing the entire talking points. One is just from an industry point of view, or from sectors point of view. One is from a spotlight point of view, where we showcase some of the interesting things that are happening or being done by teachers. We're also going to be doing one where we talk about where you can ask questions. We're going to do that once a month, what we call an open house. And we're going to do some which are teaching related. So as you go through this, I just want to kind of take a second to very quickly just tell you what's coming up. And I'm here, I'm going to share my screen and continue from where Shoma left off. So first off, these are the resources that we just put into the box. All right. Now, what I'm also going to share with you today, and this is what I promised for all of you who were attending, is absolutely gold level resource. All right. And that comes through what we call a scheme of work. Now, Trinity, in addition to being an examination board, very often our academic rigor is at the heart of what we do. So I would also like to share with you detailed plans that are made that kind of help teachers in instruction, particularly with regard to second language acquisition. So in the chat right now, I'm posting a link which is to a scheme of work for speaking and listening. So it's completely free, this resource. So all you need to do is click on it and then download which level you want. And similarly, I'm also going to share with you a scheme of work for ISE, and this will open up directly into PDF documents. So you can click on this. Now, the scheme of work is very important because it's like an 8-week course, 10 hours per week. So if you're a teacher and you want to get your kind of wrap your head around how to approach teaching as well as developing your teaching material, then I very, very strongly and highly recommend looking at the scheme of work, because it's already divided in terms of what to do each week, every day of the week, what all to cover. It's a tabular kind of presentation, which I think is truly worth its weight in gold.